Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Link Podcast with me, Elle. Remember, if you are studying English, you can study this podcast episode as a lesson on Link, the audio and the transcript. I've created it for you, and the lesson link is in the description. In fact, on Link, you can find a full course, so every episode of this podcast is there for you to study as an English lesson. Link is a game-changer tool for language learning. You can create a lesson from any content you find online. Perhaps you want to start reading your news in Spanish in the morning or watching movies in Japanese. You can make a lesson with it on Link and start enjoying content in your target language. If you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to give us a review on Apple, follow us on Spotify or SoundCloud, subscribe on Google Podcasts. Whatever showing love is on the platform that you're listening on, it is greatly appreciated. This week's guest joins me from across the pond in the UK. He is a teacher, language learner, YouTuber, and author. Today I am joined by Ollie Richards. Ollie, thank you for joining us.
The pleasure's all mine. Thanks so much.
Excellent. And so how are things in the UK right now?
From what perspective?
Yours, and I guess, why not talk about COVID? Why not? If you want to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll give you the quick version. COVID's actually on the way out. I think people here are mostly vaccinated for the most part. I think we're doing slightly better than other places. Things are opening up. So, it's the end's in sight here after a pretty abysmal year or so. And then personally, things are great. I'm doing what I do. I'm writing books. I'm making courses. I'm making loads of YouTube videos. YouTube's kind of my pet project at the moment. So I'm enjoying life.
Excellent. Yeah, and I have to say, I did notice that you've been making a lot of YouTube videos lately. It's great on your channel, Ollie Richards, which I will add a link to, of course. So, Ollie, as I mentioned, you are a language learner, and is it 8 languages? I think I saw online. Or has that changed?
Yeah, I tend to say 8. It's my least favorite question because as time goes on, you forget some languages and other ones go up. But yeah, I've definitely learned 8 languages to a good level. Those would be after English, obviously French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Japanese, Cantonese, Arabic, and then smatterings of a few others like German and Thai. But it's all it's a massive sort of smorgasbord of stuff, all kind of in flux at any one time.
Right. Excellent. And now I have to ask you, I love asking, you are a polyglot, so you speak all these languages. So I love asking polyglots who come on, what sparked their passion, what motivated them to start this language learning journey. And I've had all kinds of interesting answers, but I've never had near-death experience. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the near-death experience... Well, I'm going to get to that because that was actually that's what sparked my interest in stories and teaching through stories. It wasn't how I got interested in languages in the first place. I grew up like your classic monolingual English guy, like no contact with languages at all. I mean, I did French classes at school, but that's about it. But when I was 19 years old, I was living in London and I got a job in a cafe where I was just I came across. Everyone working in that cafe, and it was Cafe Nero in 7 Dials for anyone who knows London. Still there to this day. I sometimes pop in. Everyone who was working there with me was from different countries. So there were Italians and Swedes and I kind of got talking to these people, and I was just like blown away by how interesting their backgrounds were. I was kind of thinking, what are you doing in London? And then I realized these people were all not only speaking their own languages, but they were speaking English and often each other's languages too. So I just found it all very, very interesting. And that kind of just sparked this interest in learning languages. So I started learning French. And then shortly after that, my girlfriend decided to break up with me, which sent me into a tailspin, and I ran away to Paris. So I lived in Paris for 6 months and kind of learned French there. And then it was just, floodgates were open after that. But the near-death experience you referred to was a few years later. I was trying to learn Spanish and not doing very well, and I was traveling through Argentina, and I was in this tiny village up in the mountains on the border of Argentina and Bolivia, called Irusha. and it was very, very high up, high altitude. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night in this hostel, and I couldn't breathe. And I thought, well, maybe it's just something to do with the Malbec I'd been drinking that night. So I could have got out of bed, but it didn't get any better, and I still couldn't breathe. So I ran outside onto the balcony, like starting to panic, thinking, what am I going to do? And it got worse and worse, and I literally could not get any oxygen. And so I was kind of sitting there on the edge of this balcony, like sort of heaving, thinking, like, this is the end. And then luckily, of course, the breath did eventually come back after a few minutes. But I was too scared to go back to bed at that point. So all I could do was sort of sit down, right? So I was kind of sitting down on this balcony, looking out over this huge valley. And all I had with me was this Spanish book that I'd bought from some second-hand shop or something a few weeks earlier, and of course never touched. But I was too scared to go back to bed. We didn't have iPhones back in the day. So I just picked up this book and started reading, and it was really hard work because my Spanish wasn't very good, but I just ploughed through. I must have sat up for 2 or 3 hours reading this book. And I didn't think I'd understood all that much, but I was just about following the plot, which is something key that we might come back to later. Anyway, the next day I woke up happy to be alive, and I was walking down the street in this village. And I found all these words popping into my head. I was like, with these random Spanish words like el obispo, which means the bishop. And then I thought, well, that's weird, because normally I don't remember learning these words. And then, normally I have to try really hard to memorize words, but these words have somehow stuck. And then I realized it was because I'd sat up for hours last night reading this book, and certain words had come up in the story over and over again. And so it was one of those kind of eureka moments. And then so I kept on reading the book, and then eventually went back to see my friends in Buenos Aires, where I had been staying before. And all of a sudden I realized I was so much better at speaking. I could speak in more complete sentences because I had all this vocabulary now. I could understand a lot more of what people were saying. So it just sparked this big interest in stories. And so from there on, I kind of went on, this was many years later, but I started to try to develop a way of teaching languages using stories, because it was so powerful for me, and loads of people like stories after all. So that was that's how that happened.
Wow, my goodness. So did you ever, not to focus on language just for a second, to go back to what happened to you? Did you ever find out what that was? The whole
I think it was just
thing?
I think it was just altitude. That's what happens when you're so high up. I mean, I was right up on top of a mountain in the Andes. So I guess that's what it was. I mean, maybe I was drugged or something, but if I was, they didn't do a very good job of stealing my stuff.
No, the plot thickens though when you have experience.
Yeah, maybe there's a story to be written about that.
Yeah. So previous to that, what kind of methods? So that's when you, as you said, the kind of focus on stories began. Previously, what kind of methods had you used to study languages?
What I used was all I knew, which was what I'd done at school. So when I was at school, it was just very traditional learning. It was, repeat after me, grammar, conjugation tables, memorizing lists of words. That's all I knew. As far as I was concerned, that was, if that's how they taught us at school, it must be the best way to learn, right? So that's all I did. Every time I started a new language, I would just kind of go down to the European bookshop in Soho, where it was at the time in London, and I just see whatever textbook I like the look of and buy it and just work through it, and then make my own paper flashcards and things like that. It's a very, very traditional way of doing things, and I've sort of learned since that there's nothing necessarily wrong with doing it that way. In fact, lots of people do have quite a lot of success, but it's what comes afterwards that matters. I actually think more and more that the method itself is just a way to get started. The journey from kind of competence to actual fluency it's down to something a lot more kind of fundamental, I think. But yeah. Right.
So was Spanish the first language then that you would say you became, as you say, very competent or fluent in? Or
no, it was probably French.
Oh, okay.
But I was living in Paris, so it was I had that advantage. What changed was that when I then left France and I went back to the UK, I kept learning languages, right? But I had to figure out how to keep learning languages while not being immersed in the country, which after all is most people's situation, right?
Yeah.
So really, for most language learners, it's not that living in the country is necessarily a panacea, because there are plenty of people who go to live abroad and don't learn the language to any good degree. But for the ambitious, dedicated learner, living abroad is a huge advantage because you just have access to the language all the time. But for most people, the challenge is, how do I learn a language as a busy adult living at home, by myself, or maybe with the help of a teacher a little bit. But that's the challenge that most people face, and that's who I also try to help with the stuff that I do. And I'm very focused on the practical side of learning.
Mm-hmm. So you run the website iwillteachyoualanguage.com.
That's right. Soon to become storylearning.com. So depending on when people are watching this, we're actually because the method that I now teach using stories I call story learning, and so we're actually changing the name of everything over to storylearning.com. But that may or may not have happened by the time this goes live. So, but anyone watching this well into the future will storylearning.com should be where it's at.
Storylearning.com. Okay, excellent. So we'll talk about the story learning method in a moment. I just want to mention your short stories series, because 2 of the past guests I've had on this podcast have mentioned them. So I always ask, what would you recommend content-wise? And I've had 2 people now say Ollie Richards' short stories, readers, which are available online, were really helpful for me. So I believe one for Cantonese and for Spanish. Yes, because that's right. They offer in Spanish and Cantonese, right? The short stories, readers?
No, not exactly. Not Cantonese, but we do have Spanish, and we have
Spanish.
We have about 20 languages at this point, of which Spanish is one. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. I'll put the link in the description for those. But so they came before you developed this kind of story learning method, or I guess they were.
Yeah. So the way it happened was that I've been searching for these ways, because I found myself learning through stories, right? And the way that I was learning was I was just getting books and reading those books, and that's fine once you get to a certain level, but it's not much comfort for people who are kind of just getting started, or who are kind of at a lower level, because reading novels is pretty tough, and you've either got to already be at a good level, or you've got to be extraordinarily persistent in order to kind of make your way through a novel. So where I went first was to think, okay, well, I want to write stories that can be useful for learners. And graded readers are hardly a new concept, but graded readers have always been traditionally extremely dull and boring, and they're often kind of it would be a translation of like Sherlock Holmes or Jane Austen or whatever, which is fine, but it's not my cup of tea. So I wanted something more fresh and modern and fun, right? So I started writing short stories originally in Spanish, and then after that in many other languages, and I kind of really went down this rabbit hole of figuring out, okay, what exactly do learners want in books like this? Because I think it's probably easy to look at these books and think, oh well, he just wrote a few stories, but actually I did a huge amount of research into everything from like how long should the average sentence be, what genres of stories should we have, what's the ideal chapter length. I mean, I went deep on this stuff,
down the rabbit hole.
And so that's why I think these books have become so popular, because it is exactly what people need when they are at a kind of A2 upper beginner level to start reading. So they came first. And then, but that's still not a method for beginners. So I started to think, okay, well, I've written these books and they're super popular, but I want to do something I want to create something so that complete beginners in a language can learn using stories too. So it took me another couple of years to figure it out, but then eventually I kind of created my story learning method, which is specifically for beginners. So if you want to learn Japanese or Spanish or French or whatever, I would start to create these courses whereby, so that you'd have these courses that were based entirely on stories, but you add on to that tuition and activities and things like that get you actually kind of processing the language and learning. And so that came after, because it wasn't obvious to me how to do it well. I could have thrown something together at any point, but I really wanted to do it well.
Right.
I've got a long background in teaching, so I was quite insistent on doing that the right way.
Excellent. And what did you used to teach before?
Well, when I was a lot younger, I taught music for a few years. I used to teach
yeah.
piano and guitar because I have a background in music. I have a degree in jazz piano, which not many people know.
Wow, that's very cool.
And I used to play professionally. That was like what I did for the longest time.
Okay.
And then I came to a kind of crossroads in my life, and I decided to go and teach English. So I moved to Japan, taught English in Japan for a few years, and then did my certificates, diplomas. I did a master's degree in applied linguistics. I've really kind of when I do new things, I tend to kind of go at it quite hard. So I went down the full on teaching route. I almost went and kind of did a PhD in order, but I didn't do that in the end. But yeah, so I've got quite extensive experience as a TEFL teacher and teacher trainer and kind of academic-ish.
Wow. And are you by any chance left-handed?
I am, yeah.
No way! Okay,
Yeah.
so the last podcast episode with, I don't know if you know Nate of Nate's Adventures,
Yes,
the
I
YouTube
do.
channel. Yeah. He mentioned your readers. He said that apparently people who have musical talent are able to play instruments, multiple or just one, and are left-handed are apparently more likely to be good language learners, whatever that means, or be maybe interested in language learning. But there you go. So you prove his point. I'm going to ask every guest moving forward.
Yeah, I mean,
that's crazy.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any kind of research that shows that. I mean, the difficulty is that, I mean, so often people ask me, like, does a musical background help you have a better accent, or does it help you with languages? And my feeling on that is that yes, it has helped me in certain ways. In terms of my accent in other languages, I think tends to be quite good. Better than, I mean, there's plenty of things in my languages that are not good, but accent is one that I'm better at. Right. And also the thing of actually the discipline of training yourself to get good at something that was once hard,
right? Which
is what classical music in particular trains you to do. But in general, the thing is that for every example of someone who has a background in music and who's good at languages, you can find 10 examples of people who are just as good at languages with no musical background.
Yes, so, like Steve, I think, for example.
Right.
I don't think
Steve doesn't strike me as a musician. Maybe he is.
I don't think he plays anything. I don't know. Could be wrong. But
I can imagine him sort of sitting in some izakaya in Japan, singing some old kind of doing some crooning of some old Japanese songs or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know. I remember speaking to Stephen Krashen about this, about the musical question, and he replied quite similarly. Like, our intuition likes to we based on intuition, we like to think that there's a connection, but it's not borne out in research, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So as you mentioned, you have your short stories, your reader short stories in whichever language are available in 20 languages. I won't ask you to recite those.
Approximately.
That's amazing. What about your story learning method, which is more focused on beginners? What languages are those available in?
Yeah, so my story learning courses are basically, they are just your standard beginner courses, just like any kind of beginner textbook or whatever. And we have those in Spanish, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Turkish, Portuguese, and Russian.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
With more to come.
Okay, you heard it here first. So I want to talk, as you mentioned, about your YouTube channel. You've been making a lot more videos on your channel, Ollie Richards. How's that going? And what do you have any kind of projects in the works? How's the channel going?
Yeah, so the channel's going great. Thanks for asking, and anyone who's listening or watching, go and subscribe to the channel on YouTube, because I'm putting out some very I'm having a lot of fun with the channel. So, for example, recently I published a video on how Mormon missionaries learn languages, which has done super well. And I also find like videos of celebrities speaking languages, and kind of I talk about how they do it, and give some kind of commentary and things like that. So everyone go and subscribe to that. You can just search Ollie Richards on YouTube and drop me a comment and say hi, because I love to get those comments. But most of all, it's a way for me to just kind of, I guess it sounds corny, but it's a way for me to express myself, really, because I've always been a content creator. I started my website, and this whole business started off as a blog back in 2013. I just, I heard about this guy Benny Lewis and how he was blogging and stuff. And I thought, well, I could do that. So I started a blog, and then that all developed into, everything that's happened since has kind of developed from that. But my first passion around this was always blogging, because I've got a long background in language learning, and teaching, and I wanted to create stuff, right? I wanted to blog about my experiences, and so that I did for years and years. But one of the trends that's happened, on online in recent years, is the video has become so much more important, and so I decided to kind of make a go of my YouTube channel. So I kind of learnt how to do YouTube. I've been uploading videos on and off for about 7 years, but I just never. It was always like a way to make my blog more interesting, by making a quick video of me speaking Cantonese or whatever. But I sort of decided to, quote unquote, do YouTube or learn YouTube. So I took it quite seriously. I recruited a team who helps me with the channel, a kind of production team, and have been making or just experimenting with all these different videos, and I just love to have ideas. I have like a million ideas a minute. I've always been that way, and so the YouTube is kind of a very cool way to just have an idea and be able to put it out there. So, like, for example, I remember watching the US presidential elections last year, and thinking to myself, well, that's interesting, because I watched these debates that they had, and it's a complete cliche now that you'll get someone who's like speaking to the audience in English, and then they'll turn to the camera and speak in Spanish. I thought, well, that's kind of weird. I know why they're doing it, right? But it's also quite cool. Wouldn't it be fun to make a video like talking about the Spanish that they use? And so I just made this video on US presidential analyzing US presidential candidates. I found clips of them speaking Spanish, and then just talked about it. And that for me is just so fun to do. And so I use YouTube as a way to just kind of get my thoughts and ideas out there, and fortunately it seems to be really resonating with people.
So are you actively learning a language right now, or are you in that polyglot maintain mode?
Yeah, well, what I'm actually doing right now is I've gone back to learning kanji, so Japanese or Chinese characters in Japanese. It's like been a bit of a love-hate relationship with for me for years. But I have to say, in the last few years in particular, I haven't been all that active with language learning as much as before. And I often think about why that is. I'm very influenced by my surroundings, right? So I've often traveled a lot, and my ideal scenario for learning a new language is either when I've got a community of people around me. Like, for example, when I lived in London, I had a bunch of Brazilian friends, learned Portuguese, or else when I travel or go to the country. So when I went to Japan, learned Japanese. But then kind of right now I'm in a stage of life where I'm quite like I'm quite chilled, really. I live in a little village in the middle of the countryside in England. I hardly ever hear foreign languages, so I don't kind of have this big, or I haven't had this real urge to be studying for a while. But it kind of comes back in fits and starts. So recently I kind of decided, right, it's time to properly learn to read and write Japanese. Like I said, a kind of big unfinished project. So I'm working on that currently. So I could tell you how I'm going about it if you like, but given that I haven't had that much success with it in the past, I'm not sure it's particularly useful information. But I do maintain languages a fair bit. I mean, I regularly speak Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Cantonese, French from time to time. But yeah, it always kind of changes. I'm full of admiration for people who dedicate lots of time every day to actively maintaining languages, even without a particular reason to do so. Because I'm just not like that. I've always been someone that's very much kind of led by my surroundings. So yeah. But I suspect when the world starts to open up again properly, and more traveling is to be done, I suspect I might pick up the bug again quite quickly.
And how about your kind of entertainment time then? Do you find you watch movies, TV shows, read books, blog posts in the different languages you know, or do you kind of just gravitate towards maybe English or the languages you know best?
It's the same answer, right? I don't do stuff for the sake of the languages. Right? I know this is probably quite an uncommon answer among the guests you have here, because I know a lot of people are just incredibly dedicated to the way that they kind of structure their time to practice different languages. See, for me, it's never been about the language as such. It's always been about what I can do with that language. So it's not that I'm particularly interested in learning Japanese. It's that I want to be able to communicate with my Japanese friends and talk to them in Japanese. It's not that I necessarily love the act of learning Portuguese. It's because I love to go and hang out with Brazilians in Brazil. I just love being there. So when I don't have that immediate environment, it's not something that I just really seek out. So it's difficult. I do think about this sometimes. I mean, I will watch movies in Japanese and Portuguese and stuff, whatever. But again, like I say, it's just not something that I try and force. I think one kind of relevant question here is what it means to maintain a language. Because I think for me, the languages that I've learned fall into kind of two categories. The languages that I've learned and I'm still pretty good at, and then the languages that I've learned and I've kind of let them fall away. And I very much believe that once you've learned a language to a strong level, which I normally pin down at about a B2 level, B2 or higher, you never lose that language, right? So for example, my French is probably not great right now, but I still understand everything, and given 15 minutes of practice I can get it back to a good level, even though I haven't really spoken it for 20 years when I was last in France. But that's quite common among people who have got languages to that kind of level, kind of B2 or above level. And so when I think about the languages that I've had at that level, or I've got to that level still, I'm not worried about losing them, because I know that the day that I need them, they're going to be, I can get them back very quickly. So for that reason, I just choose not to spend my time in some arbitrary maintenance mode, but rather I just do what I want to do in my life. And if languages are a part of that, great. If not, no worries. I know I'll come back to them later. So yeah, I'm very much I'm very kind of laissez-faire with that kind of thing. It's not very practical, not much practical help for people, but that is the truth.
No, but it's like, yourself, right? You're not going to force it, because and also if you do force it, if you're like, I'm going to spend X amount of time each day on these different languages, and you're not necessarily enjoying it, you're just doing it as a chore, is it really that helpful? Maybe.
Well, I think it can be helpful. I mean, if you're spending a lot of time, if you're spending regular time keeping up a language, it will have an effect for sure. For me, it's more a case of I won't enjoy it if I'm forcing it. I've always been very busy. I've always worked hard. I have a lot of things I like to do. I spend a lot of time, walking and cycling, for example, seeing family. So I don't feel like I have time to do something that I don't really want to do. And maintaining languages maintaining languages where there's no particular outcome there, it kind of fits into that category.
Right, I see.
Sorry, everybody.
No, don't apologize. So for everyone who's listening and watching, who's going to rush to Ollie Richards' YouTube channel, what can they expect from your channel moving forward for the rest of the year and beyond?
A lot of fun language stuff is what you can expect. You're not going to find videos of me saying, here is my 6-month Korean progress or anything like that. I used to do that, but I don't do that anymore. What I try to do is I try to think of what will people enjoy, what will people find interesting. So I'm working on a video right now, for example, about the Defense Language Institute. So the Green Berets in the US, what methods do they use to train their special forces to learn languages fast?
Oh, interesting.
I'm working on some videos about different languages. Obviously, just sort of a statement of the obvious. I'm working on a video right now about how we create our books. So like when we've got these books in different languages, like how do we create a Brazilian Portuguese book, or how do we make a Korean book? I've been making a video like describing all of that. We've got videos of like celebrities speaking Japanese and things like that, and I'm having a great time at their expense. So yeah, a lot of stuff where I'm trying to sort of, but this isn't frivolous. I always try to sort of talk about different language topics and then tie it back into what you can take away from it. So if I'm making a reaction video to Colin Firth speaking Italian, I'm not just, well, he speaks great Italian, by the way. And you can, if you want to see an example of that.
I do, because that just makes me more attractive. I'm going to check that out right after.
Yeah. But what I'll try and do is I'll try to like analyze it and then tie it back to what you can take away from that, right? So it's actually, I try to make it informative and educational as well as fun. So yeah, go and subscribe. And like I say, if you're listening to this, then leave me a comment on one of the videos. Say that you came from the Link podcast, and I will. I'll look out for those, because I love getting comments from people. I love hearing from people that come from different places.
Excellent. Well, I will of course pop the link in the description to your YouTube channel, Ollie Richards. Also, I will teach you language.com. Actually, no, it will be storylearning.com moving forward. So I'll just say storylearning.com. I'll change the link when the website changes in the description. And also a link to your excellent readers, which polyglots are raving about on this podcast as well. So listen, Ollie, thank you so much. It's been a great chat. I wish you the best of luck with the story learning method and with your YouTube channel. And thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Bye-bye.